Hello everybody. Today I'm going to give you a hopefully quick demonstration showing you how I go about adding watercolour paint to sketches which I've made using pencil or pen, and I'm going to work on this particular pencil sketch today. This is a sketch made up at a well-known Scottish castle a couple of years ago, and I have probably slightly adapted the scene, but artists are allowed to make these changes. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the watercolor materials. If you're looking to get watercolors yourself, you will discover that there are endless brands and endless types of paints available. Same with paper, same with brushes. Please don't worry about this too much. This is a very small pocket set, Winsor & Newton Cotman, and really nice. Comes with this lovely little collapsible travel brush. The paint size is in here. These are called half pans. This is what I normally use. You can see the paints here. They're full pans, and you can either buy these wrapped in a wee bit of plastic and it's hardened watercolor paint in there. You just add water using your brush and it liquefies. Or you can do what I more often do, which is buy my watercolor paint in tubes, and I actually squeeze this watercolor paint from the tubes into my pans, and it just semi-dries in there, and then I take that out and about with me. So many different types of paper are available, and in general the thicker the paper that you use, the less your paper will buckle. And some of the thickest papers I use are, like this one actually, they feel like card, quite thick card, and I can add a lot of watery paint onto them without them buckling. But any paper, it's worth trying any paper. Often sketchbook paper has got enough weight to it that you can add quite a bit of watercolour without it bending too much. And does it even matter if it bends? Brushes, loads of different types are available. You can get terribly expensive watercolour brushes. I don't do that. Some of my brushes are really cheap ones. I would say that soft bristled brushes generally are better for watercolour, and brushes which can hold quite a lot of water so that you don't have to be dipping your brush into your palette in and out, in and out. Generally that's recommended for watercolour, but those of you who know me will know that I don't really believe in rules. Within art there are a lot of rules, and generally these rules are really good to know a lot of them, and you can make use of them, but you definitely must not feel that you have to slavishly stick to them. So, main colours that I use are Ultramarine Blue, I need to keep semi-standing up so that I can make sure that the video is still recording and all looking okay. So here's Ultramarine Blue. Hopefully you'll see, whenever you see me painting, a lot of the time you'll see that my brush is moving pretty rapidly. This is my really nice dark brown. This is raw umber. And I don't put black in my watercolour palettes. I use a dark brown and a dark blue, such as this raw umber and ultramarine blue, to mix together to get different levels of black or very dark. If you're working at home and you can have a really large jar, this is an old coffee jar, really large jar of water, it means you have to change your water a bit less often. If you're doing what I do when I'm out and about, which is using an old plastic herb pot, which I just put a centimetre or two of water in, it does mean that you need to change your water more often. Greens in watercolour paint. This is sap green, which is a nice one. Quite often I find that the greens look really quite chemically, so I'll often find myself adding little touches of a brown or a red or a yellow into the ready-made green paint. This yellow is Indian yellow, sometimes it's cadmium yellow, lovely rich yellow. This is yellow ochre, a colour which I do love, and alizarin, I told you I don't really know the technical details. Alizarin crimson, a brilliant, rich crimson red. And I have another blue in here. I think this might be, oh dear, you know, I can't quite remember. Phthalo blue. I also love Prussian blue. Okay, so watercolour scares a lot of people because of all these it's a traditional medium which has been used for a long time, and there are lots of rules associated with it. I'm just not bothered about that. It's good to know these rules, really good to know some rules. But please don't get bogged down on any rules in art. Art should be fun or stimulating or meditative, and just enjoy what watercolour paint does. Enjoy trying it on different surfaces. Try it on really smooth paper, really rough paper. Try it on the inside of cereal packets. Try it on expensive watercolour card. Try all these different things. See what you like. Some people in my Room for Art workshops have even painted using watercolour on canvas, and I've said to them, I've never heard of doing that before, but some really nice paintings have been made. Beautiful little wren paintings on micro canvases by somebody who comes along. Okay, so I'm just going to get started, and watercolour, I'm wondering if I might zoom in for you. Now this will let you see my palette a bit less, but the painting a bit more. Okay, so I hope that is better. I'm also going to try one more thing. I just paused it there. Okay, I've tried adjusting the lighting a bit too. So here I'm using quite a fine brush, which allows me to, well, draw lines, but also allows me to do wide, bold marks like that. And I'm not going to talk too much about colour mixing and different theories and things, as I said, mostly because I don't know about it. Just practice and experiment and enjoy it, and you will gradually find ways that work better for you. You're most welcome to get in touch with me to ask me specific questions that you might have, and I'd also absolutely recommend that you have a look on the secondhand book website, Abe Books, and get yourself a copy of Colin's Learn to Paint. There are lots of different books in this series. So Outdoors in Watercolour by Alwyn Crawshaw from Top TV Artist, or his Learn to Sketch, which includes watercolour. Any of the books by Alwyn Crawshaw in the Colin's Learn to Paint series, I love them, and they've got all sorts of great tips and techniques, and normally just cost a couple of pounds second hand. I've found quite a few in Edinburgh charity shops as well. So here I am with my sap green. I'm trying to make sure that I don't cover everything with paint, because it's really nice with watercolour to have white paper left showing through. The contrast of the white paper against the different colours of your paint helps the different colours to shine out and to glow against the white paint. And when you watch artists painting in this sort of sketchy fashion, it sort of looks like the paintbrush is flying across the surface of the paper very often. I do have a tendency to get carried away and over detail things, overwork things. Also, I have a tendency to add too many colours sometimes. It can be a nice exercise to not have all these paints on your palette, but just get yourself a palette which you squeeze out just maybe 3 or 4 or even 2 or 3 colours onto and decide this whole painting will be done just using these colours. So all these different marks are just to give the impression of trees. This is in a very forested part of Scotland. And now I'm going to wash a bit more. What I mean by that is I've added more water into this paint. So it's going on more thinly, so the paper, the white paper is showing through the paint a bit more. And now down here what's going to start happening is some bits where the dark green is not yet dried, those bits, the dark green will blend, mix in, run into the watery light green. And that might annoy you, or that might be a happy accident, or it might be what you had intended. A bit of that yellow ochre. This is the foreground, the path. I haven't yet changed brush, and I would recommend that people try to not use only one brush for their whole painting. Especially if you're working on a larger painting. This is pretty small, as you can see. I do love working on small scale. Yeah, using a variety of brush sizes and brush shapes can make your painting more interesting. Generally, unless you're doing it on purpose for the effect, generally you don't want to have a painting where every brush mark is the same size as every other brush mark and every brush mark is going in the same direction as every other brush mark, generally. This particular castle is sort of, well, I find that in different lights it looks yellowy and or pinky. So I think it's going to turn out yellowy and or pinky. I feel that this colour is going on darker than I had intended, or darker than I feel I want the end result to be. So I could wait and let it dry and see how it looked. And the paint will look a bit less dark once it has dry, but you can also, with watercolour and with other paints when they're still dry, you can get a piece of your tissue. I tend to use old napkins from cafes rather than them getting chucked out, but not going to many cafes at the moment. So here, while this paint is still wet, I'm going to dab this down, this tissue, lift it up, and the colour is still there just a little bit. Now I'm thinking, that's slightly milder than I wanted, so I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to colour here. Mostly for me, painting and art is quite experimental, and overall I think that's a really good thing. But it does lead to the frustration of some paintings just not turning out anything like you had imagined they would turn out like, and that can be deeply frustrating, and it does lead to paintings just you never being happy with them. But it can also lead to really exciting things happening. nice square-ended brush, and I'm going to do something up in the sky. Here's some ultramarine. I'm not wanting this to go on very dark, so I've put a lot of water in, and more water. Oh, a bit of brown was in my brush there. Okay, and for now, just going to leave the sky like that. I like to do a thing where I get slightly thicker dark paint. Here's the dark brown, and it's very dry on the brush. I've not added much water to it. And I'm now going to put some of these marks on the hillside. And then when that has dried, I'm going to paint thin paint on top. So this dark brown will show through and provide texture. And that texture could give the impression of trees or rocks. Or a slippery scree slope. Now I'm thinking I'll bring some of that dark brown down here as well into the foreground. So please remember, just experiment, experiment. That's a good thing about using cheap materials like the inside of cereal packets. You feel much less worried about ruining and wasting expensive materials when it doesn't go well. And I'm trying to remember what I said to myself about leaving white paper showing. That dark brown that I put on up on the hillsides, it's probably dry enough now that I can go and work on it in a minute. And some artists, lots of artists, are much more methodical at painting than I am. Some people would start off working up in the sky, the furthest away part of the painting, and just gradually work their way forwards. I think that the best way for me is to try to work on all or a lot of the painting all at once. So my brush is dotting around the painting quite a lot, as you have probably noticed. Now, okay, there you can see this yellow. Well, the brown is very much showing through, and I'm thinking, that yellow, don't know if it's quite what I'm after. So here's some of the yellow ochre. And actually I'm going to go for some darker green here, make this one bolder. This bit of closer hillside boulder. Ah, see, I love these sorts of things that I love rich, bold watercolour. But now it's obscuring some of those foreground trees. Not foreground. Trees which are closer than the hillside. So I need to darken up the paint on them. I'll often do this sort of thing. Got too much paint on my paintbrush, but I don't want to water it down, so I'll dab away on a blank piece of paper. You sometimes see in galleries artists exhibiting their finished watercolour paintings, and on the side of the watercolour is a strip or a border of lots and lots of different dabbings of paint, and that is them doing exactly this as they're painting their painting, and they decide to frame the painting to show that. And I really like seeing that. You're getting to see the history of the whole painting and all those marks. This video was intended to be 10 minutes long. Seems to be 20 at the moment. Okay. I've mixed together some yellow, some green. Now going to bring a bit of green into this hillside. You see the brown is still very much showing through. And I am starting to think, okay, I want to draw this painting to a conclusion pretty soon. Finishing touches of paintings, I will often find that the very finishing touches have to happen later on, once everything in the painting has dried. For example, if I want to paint in these fence posts, which I probably do, I might choose to not touch them until everything else is dried, because I just want some crisp bits of detail there to finish off the painting. And if you're painting outdoors on a sunny day, then it doesn't take long at all. Your very wet watercolour painting can be dry in minutes if you put it in direct sunlight. If you are painting outside on a sunny day, I do recommend not having your painting in the direct sunlight while you're painting it, because you can get really sore head from the glaring white paper. Now that roof is darker than I want it, so I've lifted off most of that darkness, and that's better. You should have seen the state of my palette when I opened it up getting ready for this video. I'm not very good at cleaning my palette between trips. Okay, I'm now using the dark brown raw umber and drawing in a bit of outlining on the castle, just following my earlier pencil marks. Remember, none of these things I'm telling you are musts. I didn't have to draw in these dark outlines, I just have decided right now that I want them to bring a bit more detail. And I think it's probably dry enough now that I can risk painting in something on these fence posts, so I'll do that. I'd love to see what everybody watching this produces themselves. And I apologise for any odd things said whilst I'm painting. That's partly because it's quite hard to know what one is on about whilst one is getting engrossed in painting. And it's partly because that's just me. Now some dark brown coming down here, highlighting the edge of this path. Now I'm filling in the centres of the fence posts. And I want to have the effect of this being a gateway that one walks through as one adventures into this landscape. So I do want to try to paint in the wire of the fences. And I'm going to use, you can see I'm using any old bit of my palette. I've mixed up a bit of the dark blue, ultramarine blue, and a bit of the dark brown raw umber, and we'll see how this goes. If I did this when the paper was underneath, when the paper underneath was wet, then these fine lines would really run, and that's not what I'm after here. So I'm hoping that I've left the paint underneath long enough to not run too much. Although it looks a bit wet there. We'll see. Okay, good. I think I've got away with it. I'm nearly finished this for you at, oh dear, 26 minutes. I hope the sound is okay. I hope everything's okay. I'm darkening these yet further. And I wonder if that dark blue, the ultramarine blue fence wire, the blue fence wire, I'm just wondering if that is looking a little bit too blue on its own. I suspect that's not picked up on the camera. But because of that, I'm adding some of the dark blue elsewhere within the painting. Because in general it's good to try to have colours appearing throughout the painting, not just lots of a certain blue down here but nowhere else in the painting, lots of a certain orange here but nowhere else in the painting. It helps your painting to hold together more as, well, a united painting if you put little touches of the same colour throughout. Okay, so I'm now just about happy to finish this, and if you're feeling happy with your painting, then I would suggest that you get yourself a nice fine little brush and sign it. Why not? Or a pencil. There we go. Remember to clean your brushes. A bit less important with watercolour than with oil or acrylic, especially acrylic where it's extremely important, but do remember. And I'll just take this off the multicoloured background. I was using, this is masking tape, I was using rolls of masking tape like that to create an sticky all the way around thing which I used to stick my paper down. So here is the finished painting, and it will stop now. It's only just 30 minutes. Okay, thank you.